And if you're ready, Chris, I'll go ahead and make your presenter, and we'll go ahead and begin.
Okay.
Have a great session.
Thank you. Thank you for everybody taking time out of your schedule to join us today as we talk about data quality services. Let me get this slideshow going. Can everybody see my screen? Is the resolution okay? All right.
It actually looks good to me.
First, a little. Okay, perfect. A little introduction. My name is Chris Price. I'm a BI consultant with Pragmatic Works. I've been in IT for about 12 years. I come from a developer background, so that's kind of my perspective. I do have a blog on BIDN. I have a pretty good series on DQS if anybody's looking to dive in deeper beyond this talk. You can reach me at my email address if you have questions after the webinar, and you can follow me on Twitter if that's your thing. So the agenda today, we're going to start off first by doing a kind of establishing a baseline of what we mean when we say data quality. Then we'll dive into an intro of DQS and DQS concepts, and the bulk of this webinar is actually demos, so I don't have too many slides. When we talk about data quality, we're really talking about the ability to use data in a suitable way. So can we make a business decision with that data? The book definition is there on the slide. It's the degree to which data is suitable for business. An important part of this is that there's no magic button. There's no software that you can go out and buy and plug into your enterprise and magically your data quality problems go away. It really is a combination of people, technology, and process. DQS is the technology piece of that. The people in the process are the hardest parts about data quality. The value proposition, there's really not much to say there. Bad data costs you money. I'm sure there's plenty of examples out there. One that I've seen in the past is a marketing department that mails off 100,000 piece mailer out to the customers and gets 10,000 pieces back. You know, it's a pretty big shock when they find out that 10% of the addresses they have are not deliverable. So, you know, it's a fairly easy concept for the business to understand when we talk about data quality. When we measure data quality, we generally define it across 5 dimensions. Those dimensions are here on the screen. Is your data standard in the sense that if you're using codes or I have the state example up there, but another example would be genders. If you have male, female, or man, woman, are they consistent across your entire data set? Is your data set complete? Are you missing 20% of something like a last name or email? Is it accurate? Do you have customers that have passed away and you're still trying to mail your catalog or marketing materials to them? Is it valid? Are the values within acceptable range? If nobody in your company makes a salary over $100,000, a salary of $1 million wouldn't necessarily be a valid value for a salary. Also, is your data unique? Do you have duplicates? And customer deduplication is obviously a big field, and there's a reason for that. So I have a couple examples that try to point out what we just talked about as far as the dimensions. So we have a before and after case here. The first is obviously the dirty data that comes in. In the case of the first record, we see that the first and last name are concatenated into a single field. The data isn't standardized in the gender, and we have incomplete address, whether it's missing a zip code or the address is incomplete. We also have data that's not accurate or potentially not accurate. You know, is Jane Doe reasonably a male? When you run through the process of cleansing, what we're trying to do is to clean all that data up. So we can do things like split the name apart. We standardize the gender and the state. We complete addresses and fill in any any missing information. This next is an example of matching, and this is what we talk about uniqueness. So in the case of cleaning up data that is not unique, what we've done here is we've taken 4 records and using, there's multiple ways you can do it, whether it's a fuzzy matching or using a service. We can actually identify that the first 3 records are all part of the same group. This really plays out in situations where you're trying to household data and do stuff like that. You may want to identify Maria Smith as a different customer than John Smith. That's really a business decision when it comes to uniqueness. But for the purpose of this example, you kind of see how we're trying to group records together when we're identifying whether a record's unique or not. So data quality today, again, going back to the example, most organizations do some data quality, especially if they're involved in data warehousing. That may be at a high level, like validating a phone numbers in the right format, or using a regular expression to validate an email address. But data quality really goes beyond that. So going back to the example of undeliverable addresses, oftentimes I've seen that data quality isn't really an issue until it's an issue. So it's handled in an ad hoc manner. Now, when we do handle it, it can be handled in a couple different ways. Manually is probably one of the most common in the sense that we realize our customer contact information is not accurate, so they put together an Excel spreadsheet, they hand it to an intern, and the intern is making phone calls to try and update contact information if your customer base is small enough to do it that way. Another approach would be to do some sort of statistical or algorithmic, something like fuzzy matching in SSIS. It could be domain specific. Maybe we do some address correction using a product like Melissa Data that will do address deliverability for us. Could also be some sort of custom code in a proprietary stored procedure or some other code module that nobody knows about or knows exactly how it works. These are all fairly common ways in which data quality is accomplished today. So when we talk about needing a solution for data quality, there's really 4 parts of a solution if we're going to implement a data quality solution. Obviously, you have to be able to do things like cleansing and matching. That's kind of the basis of everything. But to understand the data quality, you have to be able to profile the data so you know the state of your data as far as the quality goes. So you want to understand how many new values are in that set of data. What's that data look like before and after we've done our data quality activities on it. And then obviously we want to be able to monitor the process. We want to know who's doing what. And we'll see how all 4 of these parts are built into DQS. So what is DQS? I've copied the Microsoft marketing materials straight from them there. The key part to that definition is that this solution is knowledge driven. And that's what drives the value behind DQS, and we'll see why here shortly. DQS is intended for IT pros and data stewards more than IT. So it's an easy-to-use solution that allows you to push the responsibility for data quality to your data experts, which are generally your business users. It's obviously available in SQL Server 2012, and it's part of the larger enterprise information management strategy that Microsoft is using. The other parts of that I have up there as far as Master Data Services and Project Barcelona and SSIS. And again, to reiterate the point, DQS is a tool and not a solution. So it's not something that you're going to be able to install on a server, and it's just magically going to make everything better. So before we dive into the demos, 5 important concepts that we need to understand. The first, and obviously, is knowledge driven. So data quality is based on a knowledge base that we're going to build. And that knowledge base you get out of it what you put into it. So the more robust and more mature that knowledge base is, the better it will serve you in your data quality activities. Semantics, we're going to actually use domains within a knowledge base to capture the semantics of our data. We'll use a knowledge discovery process to actually acquire that knowledge within our knowledge base. Excuse me. It's open and extensible. You can actually hook DQS up to the cloud, the Azure Data Market, and actually pull reference data. You can also do things like data appends. So Melissa Data's, going back to that example, has a service out on the data market. You can actually hook your knowledge base up there and validate addresses and append any missing information. There's also a host of other services out there, and it's growing every day. So there's also third-party reference data providers which are not cloud-based, so you have that option as well. And then, again, to reiterate, it's user-friendly. It's targeted toward a business user, your data experts, your data stewards. So let's jump straight over to the demo. All right. This is, to start, is the data quality client. So installing the data quality client is a fairly straightforward process. It's pretty much a next operation. You do have to specify a password that's used for encryption, but other than that, you can basically take the defaults, and this is what you get at once it launches. So you'll notice there's three main areas here. You have the knowledge base management, data quality projects, and administration. Everything you do through DQS is done through this client with the exception of the SSIS component. Now the back end to this, when DQS is installed, it lives off three databases, and I'm going to bring up Management Studio here to point those out. So you'll notice that we have the three databases here. The first being DQS main. DQS main is where all the application logic, for lack of a better term, lives. All your published knowledge bases live there. It's the core database to the DQS, the data cleansing activities. DQS projects, when we actually run a data quality project, you'll see that's where all those projects live. So you'll see how that database is used. The staging area is really intended, just like it says, if you need to move data into and out of DQS, you'll see that there's some limitations as far as how you connect to servers. So this database is really intended to give you a place to land data both before you import it into a data quality project and before you export it, or after you export it. So let's jump back over here to the client. I'm actually going to start at the administration because some of the concepts will come into effect once we actually talk about knowledge base management and actual projects. In the administration, you have a fairly robust activity tracking. We can actually go in the activity tracking and we can see all activities that are occurring or have occurred within DQS. So we can actually, in this case, we can see that we've imported some project values. We can look at the profiler. In this case, there's nothing there. Let's find a better example. In this case, we have an SSIS cleansing activity that occurred, and I don't have an example of that yet. No. All right. So we'll jump back over and look at the profiler, but you have the ability to see that exactly what activities occurred and what was happening within those activities at the step level. Configuration, you have a couple different configuration options. This first tab I'll kind of gloss over. This is really how you hook up your data market account if you're hooking up to the cloud or doing anything with third-party reference data. General settings, that's where the most important settings, at least for this session, are. When you're doing interactive cleansing, you have two thresholds. The first is your minimum score for suggestions, and the second is auto corrections. So in the case of for autocorrection, anything that scores 80% or higher, DQS will actually autocorrect that for you based on what it thinks is the most correct solution. Suggestions, if it's below 80% but greater than 70%, it'll actually suggest those changes to you, and then it's up to you to actually either accept or reject the changes. The minimum matching score is basically the threshold for what we'll consider a match when we do matching and actually determine the similarity between records. You do have ability to do some configuration on what you're logging. You can actually do that down to the component or module level within DQS. So you have a good amount of control over logging here within the user interface. And there's actually a lot more to do. I will point you to MSDN if you're interested in doing anything more advanced with the logging. So let's dive in and see how easy it is to create a knowledge base and get started. We're going to jump over here to the knowledge base management section, and we're going to go ahead and create a new knowledge base, and we'll just name it. You'll notice we do have the option to create a knowledge base from an existing knowledge base or importing from a DQS file, so that if it's something you've restoring from a backup or you're getting from somebody else, you do have that option. We're actually going to use the knowledge discovery process to create our knowledge base. So you have three activities. Domain management, that's where you do things like define business rules, and we'll see that we're going to use the knowledge discovery to create our knowledge base, and then we'll jump back over to the domain management to actually create some business rules. You also can define a matching policy, and we'll look at that as well. So you have two options as far as data sources, the first being SQL Server, the second is Excel file. With SQL Server, you'll notice that there's no connection string. You basically have access to whatever database are native to the server that DQS is hosted on. So that goes back to the limitation and why the staging database is there. For the demo purposes, we're actually going to work from an Excel file. And let me go ahead and select the Excel file. Now, you'll notice we have a bunch of source columns in our Excel file. Let's actually preview the data. You'll notice the data that we're working with is just a list of all Major League Baseball and NFL teams, their stadiums, city, state, and the stadium capacity. So it's a fairly limited set of data. You'll notice, you can see we have some inconsistencies in our league, whether it says baseball or football. Some of them say National Football League and NFL. We're going to define some rules around stadium capacity and do some other cleanup. I'm from the Tampa Bay area, and we have a couple different ways. Sometimes the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are referred to as the Bucs, and sometimes it's the Buccaneers. So we'll handle all those scenarios throughout the course of the demo. So let's go ahead and map our source columns, and I'm just going to go through here and do this quickly. Now, the domain is, again, where we're capturing the semantics of our data. In this case, it's you can compare it to a column. So right now, since we're creating a knowledge base, we don't have any domains, so we have to create the domain within our knowledge base. And we do that through this icon here, which is the circle with the star, create domain. And you'll notice when it pops up, you have the option to specify a domain name. You can select a data type. You have a couple different options as far as date, decimal, integer, string. We'll look at what leading values are. Normalization is a format, so we can basically tell it if we want to format the output to uppercase, lowercase, or to capitalize it. In this case, for team name, we'll capitalize it. We can also define a language. Now, the language comes into the speller, which uses a dictionary. So again, you're trying to capture the semantics of your data. You want to be able to correct it as efficiently as possible, so you need to make sure that if you're working in multiple languages that you select the appropriate language. If you're working with a data type that would never be found in a dictionary value, you can actually uncheck that, and that's one less thing that DQS has to run through. So again, make sure you work through these domains and you configure them as accurately as possible. So I'm going to quickly go through this. You'll see in the case of capacity, it's decimal type. I don't have the same options as far as dictionaries and whatnot, so it's only relevant. In this case, I'm going to select the formatting for that as well. And it should just take me one more second here to create all the necessary domains. All right. So with that, we've created a single domain for each column in our set of data that we're creating a knowledge base for. But in order for this to be useful, we need to be able to validate between domains. So in the case of the Giants, for example, there's a San Francisco Giants in baseball. There's also a New York Giants in football. So in order to be able to really validate the team name, we need to know the league. The way you accomplish that is through what's called a composite domain. So we have the ability to link domains together into groups that are related or dependent on each other. We could create a composite domain, the icon next to the create single domain, and we can name it. We'll call it sports teams. And in this case, we're going to select the single domains that we want to put into our composite domain. So we're going to do things like team name, state, league, and capacity. And we'll build some business rules around that so that we can actually use the various domains that are in our composite domain to validate one another. So once you do that, to point out the section on the right, we get a preview of everything that's in our knowledge base, all the domains. We can see our composite domain here, as well as the single domains that are included. If we click the View Selected Composite Domains, we see that we are, in fact, using our composite domain for the current activity. The only time you will actually see this button enabled is if all the columns for the composite domain are mapped to a source column. So we'll click Next. We're going to go ahead and I'll click the Start button. What's happening here is the Excel file we've pointed to, it's actually loading that data, it's pushing that data to the DQS server, and it's running through the knowledge discovery process. So in the profiler, we see what happened. We see that it evaluated 62 records. You can see the count of total values, unique values. We can actually look at the domain level and see total versus unique. So we see that there are 6 unique values in leagues, which would maybe indicate a problem if we're only working with 2 leagues. We can see that there's 4 countries and there should only be 2. So we can kind of see at a high level the statistics of what we're doing. And this really goes into the profiling part of the DQS solution. So let's jump to the Manage Domain Values. You'll see that on this step we actually can get into the domain level and we can see what values it found. So we have the ability to, in this case capacity is probably not that useful, but we can go to league and we can see the 6 values that it's found. Now what we can do is we can start cleaning this up. To clean up baseball, for example, I'm going to select the 3 values that represent baseball. And I can say right click and say set a synonym. So basically I want all these values to mean one thing. Now if I wanted you notice that by default it just selected the top based on alpha sort and it corrected the other 2 to baseball. If that's not my intended behavior, I can actually choose the value I want and say set as leading. That's what we mean by the leading value in the synonym group. So I have the ability that anytime DQS sees baseball for the league type, it's actually going to autocorrect it to MLB for me. So I can go ahead and do the same for football. And I'm going to do the same as far as setting NFL to the leading value. So in just a few clicks, I've gone through my set of data and I've defined a set of rules that will help me standardize values for my domain. Now, if there are other situations that we wanted to exclude a value and say it's inaccurate, we have that ability to do that here. We can actually add a new domain value and say we have XFL, and nobody liked the XFL, so we actually want to set that to an error. So the knowledge base not only needs to capture the valid values in your data, it also needs to capture the common mistakes or common errors. The more it can match data in your knowledge base, the better it's going to perform. So we're going to actually publish this knowledge base now. Publishing is what makes the knowledge base available to all users for cleansing and matching projects and activities. So we're not quite done with this, but I actually want to jump over to the domain management because that's where we can define business rules at. I'm actually going to go with a domain I've previously created, and we're going to, if you click the arrow, you'll notice you have options as far as domain management, knowledge discovery, and matching policy. We're going to jump over into domain management, and you'll notice that the view is similar to what you saw before. We have the domain properties. That's what you used when you defined your domain, so you do have some ability to change pretty much anything but the data type if you find later that it's not suiting your needs. You have the concept of domain values, which is exactly what we looked at prior. The notions you have here are domain rules. And domain rules are basically, let me get to stadium capacity. This is where you can define rules that need to be to be passed for the data to be valid. So in the case of stadium capacity, if we have two rules defined here. If we get a value that's less than 0, or in this case greater than 110,000, we're automatically going to set the value as wrong. So we want to reject that value. So we can define rules at the domain level. Where this becomes more useful is at the composite domain, which is our sports team. So I have a set of rules here, and we'll only walk through a couple of them. I've got this DQS knowledge base out on my blog, so if anybody's interested in getting the full version of that, it is out on my blog, and I'll put that link up at the end. We have a couple composite rules to illustrate what's possible with the composite domain. So the first is there's a difference between the size of Major League Baseball and NFL stadiums. Generally, Major League Baseball stadiums are smaller, whereas NFL stadiums are bigger. And the dividing line is around 60,000 roughly. So we've defined two basically rules to validate our stadium size. The first being a Major League Baseball rule where we say if our league is MLB, then we want the stadium capacity to be between 30,000 and 60,000. We've done the same thing for NFL, only we've used 60,000 and 100,000. So, and we'll see when we actually cleanse some data, if a value falls outside that range, DQS will actually mark it as an error. Now there's some other useful things we can do. In the case of our Giants example I gave earlier, we have the ability to actually modify values. So we've built a rule with an AND condition in here where in the case of the NFL Giants, we've said if the league is NFL and our team name is Giants, then we actually want to change the team name and set it to New York Giants. We've done, again, the same thing with Major League Baseball. Now, I want to point out the options you have here because you do have quite a bit of options, and you can build some fairly robust business rules in here. You obviously can do things like length and value. You can do pattern-based matching through regular expressions. you have a lot of options, so you can get real creative in how you apply the business rules. And again, when you're developing these knowledge bases and developing these business rules, the more you put into it, the better it will serve you. So I'm going to finish that. And again, we'll publish it. And now we're going to actually jump over to the data quality project and see how we actually can work with that knowledge base that we've created. So we have a couple options. Obviously, when you're working with the data quality project, you can work through the data quality client here. If you're doing cleansing activities, you can use the SSIS component. We'll actually briefly look at the SSIS component, but we'll actually build a project here first. So we're going to start a new data quality project. We can actually give it a name. We have to select our knowledge base that we're going to use, in this case the sports team knowledge base. And we have to specify what activity we're going to be doing, whether it's cleansing or matching. Generally, if you're doing matching, you should always do a cleanse first because you're going to get better matching results off clean data. So you would always want to do a cleansing activity and then use the extract out of your cleanse to do the match. So we're actually going to start with the cleanse. You'll notice the dialogues looks the same throughout the application. Again, that's a usability thing. They're trying to make it as easy to use for the business user. So I've selected my worksheet. We have to go through and do the same thing as far as mapping our columns. And this time, obviously, we're not creating any domains. We're just mapping to the actual domains in our knowledge base. Once we've done that, you notice once we've satisfied the 4 domains in our composite, we have the View Selected Composite Domain option again. You have the same ability to preview a data source if you need to look at the data before you start working on it. And we'll click Next. Again, the process should feel familiar based on what we experienced with the knowledge discovery. We're going to start that. We're going to load the data to the server. It's going to do the cleansing activity, and it's going to give us some profiler information once it finishes. So you can see we've got some yellow bubbles here. This is the notification part. So there was an option which I skipped over in the administration that you can enable notifications. This is what you're enabling or disabling, is these little yellow pop-ups that basically will tell you there are relatively few corrections. We're obviously working with a very small set of data, so these aren't very meaningful on a set of data that has 67 records. So our profiling data at the composite level tells us how many values are corrected, suggested. We can actually, on the next step, we can view and manage those results when we click Next. And we can look at each of the single domains and then all the composite domains as they roll up. So in the case of city, we don't really have anything to do. We notice there's everything was either correct or in this case auto-corrected. So it was able to auto-correct a misspell of Miami Gardens and a misspelling of Tampa and Los Angeles. I was able to auto-correct all 3 of those for us. Country, you see that it was able to go through and again, autocorrect based on what we had set up in our domain values as far as telling it to correct the full United States or United States of America, correcting it to U.S. for a country. And then we can actually go into the sports team, and this is where the bulk of what we have here. So we have 4 suggestions, and again, if we look at the percentages here, the confidence, you'll notice that all of these confidences are in the 70s, which falls below the 80% for autocorrection. Now, DQS actually gives you a reason on why it went the path that it did. So in this case, we can actually look at this first record. It says DQS cleansing in the domain league. So it's guessing that the league is MLB. If we go out here and look at the original value, it's actually down here, you can see that the original value is MLBB. So that's probably a pretty good guess. When we're ready to approve or reject it, we can actually approve it. And you'll notice that it moves to the corrected values. So we would do this for each suggested record in in this kind of project. So in this case, it's also corrected some misspelling of Buccaneers and a shortened version of the Rays, and it gives you the reason for each of those. I'll go ahead and approve all these just to move forward. You'll see we have one new value, or what it thinks is new value. In this case, it's NY Mets, which we just actually want the team to be the New York Mets. So we have the ability to actually correct it right here within the data quality. It's going to correct it. You'll see the reason is going to be a new value, and then we can approve it. We have a couple invalid values, and this is where our stadium rule came into effect. So we have the Kansas City Chiefs, and the stadium size was set at 177,000. That obviously failed the stadium size rule. The same for the Texas Rangers. The stadium size was set at 4,900. So both of those obviously failed validation, and you see that it's actually set to invalid. Now we do have the ability to override DQS. It gives you the option by default. It sets to reject. If for some reason we wanted to bypass that, we can actually approve that and move on. Once we've reviewed all of our changes, we're ready to move on to the next step. Now, DQS doesn't change any data on its own. So basically what you've done is you've loaded up a set of data, you've done the data quality activities, and now you have to export that data and do something with it. So your export options are the same as your import. You can either export to SQL Server, or in this case a CSV. You have the option of exporting the data and cleansing info, which again the cleansing info is for each column you get a source, an output, a reason, a confidence, a status. So you have the ability to export all that data out if you need it, or you can actually export out the data only. And I'll do that export real quick just to show you what that looks like. So let's open up that file. And it's just taking a second on my virtual machine here. So what you see when you export data only is you obviously get the team name, the league, which is set to capitalize, which again we probably would want to set that to uppercase, stadium, and then we actually get the full domain, which in this case again is the team, state, league, and capacity. So that's what it looks like from a data quality project perspective. Let's see what it looks like from the SSIS perspective. So within SSIS, new in 2012, one of the components is this data cleansing component. So again, the process is fairly similar. When you actually open it, you have to define a connection manager to the DQS server, which it's just a URL basically. This is actually just a server name. You select your knowledge base that you want to use. You specify what you want your input columns to be. You do your mappings. Again, very similar to the data quality. You do have some advanced options as far as including some additional field level columns, standardizing your output. If you're using as your data market, you can actually append data and so forth. So once you run the process, you have a single output. You have to do a conditional split based on the status, the record status, and in this case we can split it into correct invalid, corrected, and auto-suggest. So if we run this, we're running this against the same set of data, so it's the exact same spreadsheet that we ran previously. What's happening is it's, again, taking the data, it's batching it over to the DQS server who's processing it and then sending it back. So this is, whereas the data quality client is designed to work multi-threaded and run in parallel on multiple processors, DQS, the SSIS component, is intended as a background task. So the DQS cleansing task will actually only run on a single processor on the DQS server. So Microsoft recently came out with a best practices white paper for DQS performance, and one of the things they pointed out was if you need to get that parallelism, you actually can duplicate the DQS cleansing component up to the number of processors and then union all the results back together. So you'd want to somehow split your data flow, whether it's an arbitrary split or if you can split it on like language, if language is different, or if there's some split that makes sense from a DQS perspective, split it so that you can take advantage of running on multiple processors from SSIS. What you see here is, again, the same thing. We were able to see corrected, invalid, correct, invalid, corrected, suggestion, and if anything fell outside those statuses. So you would still be responsible for taking some action on these on these various statuses within your SSIS or through some sort of external process. So that wraps up cleansing. We're going to jump back over here to the DQS. Let's finish this project. And what we're going to do now is jump over to matching in the last 10 minutes or so. So we're going to go back to our sports team, and again click the arrow, and you notice there's a matching policy. So matching within DQS is rule-based, and we'll see what that means. Rather than just doing some sort of arbitrary match, you define rules based on how you want to match your data. So we can actually define a data set, and this is used to test our rules. So let's go ahead, and I need to get to the right folder. So I've got a set of data that's very similar. It just has some duplicates in there, and we're just going to do team and league. I think that'll be enough. So we're just going to work off a subset of the domains for the purpose of the matching policy. And you'll notice I actually already have a couple rules defined. So the two rules I have defined are, first is we're doing a team league match. So it'll look at the league. In this case, we have a rule that says use the league, and it has to match exactly. The second says we want the team name to be similar. It accounts for 100% of the weight of the score, and our minimum matching score is set to 80. So if we start this, we can actually test to see how it works. We can see that in our data set it found a bunch of matches, and you'll notice some interesting things here. In this case, we're matched it to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It was able to match Bucks and Buccaneers, which are probably outside the 80%, but it was intelligent enough to use the leading domains. So even though we didn't do any sort of cleansing and standardization and clean these values up, it was still able to, using the knowledge in a knowledge base, to match those as part of the process. You obviously can build some fairly complex rules if you're doing some sort of customer matching and you want to match on email first, and then you want to add a second rule that does address and last name. You obviously can build all that. You can have multiple rules within knowledge base, and that's why I have two defined here. In this case of the second rule, we're doing a state match that accounts for 25% of the weight, and a team match that counts, a team name match that counts for 75. The same process. So once we've defined our rules, we can actually process the data set and we'll see how both of those rules come into play. So you have the notion of overlapping and non-overlapping cluster, and the best way to illustrate what that means is if we look at the number of clusters here in our profile information, overlapping clusters we have 5. It's exactly what it sounds like. So the records can overlap clusters. So a single record could belong to multiple clusters. And a good example of that, if we scroll down a little bit here, I believe it's 10662 is the record, is in this cluster. It's also in this cluster. So it's that single record is participating in multiple clusters. If we change that to non-overlapping and restart the process, we can look at the number of clusters and see that now we only have 2 clusters. You have the ability to, again, when we're defining these matching rules, this is all testing your rules to make sure it performs as behaved. You can view any unmatched records to see if there's anything out there that should have been matched and wasn't. Once you're satisfied that your matching rules are doing as expected, you can finish it, and we're doing the same thing. We're publishing it out to making it available to projects. Now, there's no matching component in SSIS, so the only option you have is through a data quality project. So let's go ahead and quickly start a new data quality project, and we're doing a matching demo. And we're going to select our sports team. And again, the activity we're going to be doing is matching. We'll click Next here. Again, we're going to be working from an Excel file. And we'll cheat and we'll use the same file we used to build our matching rules, which should guarantee us a pretty good fit. So we have our team name, league, and state. And you'll notice that in the matching, it was smart enough to match the column names for us so that we don't have to do that. You'll also notice that it tells us what domains are defined in the matching policy and tells us what domains need to be matched. This would be more useful if we were maybe working on a different set of data that didn't have the same column names, so that we would know in order to do this matching all the columns that had to be mapped to domains. So we can click Next, and again, at this point, you should be fairly comfortable with the flow of the data quality project because the screens, again, look similar from activity to activity. And this looks exactly like it did when we built our matching policy. So in this case, we did overlapping. Let me switch this to overlapping so there's just less data to work with. The difference here, and I didn't point out the first, is the first things to point out are obviously the profiler. You still have the profiler available. Your matching rules, notice the green and blue squares. These are important in the grid because it tells you for each record which rule the record matched, or which rule satisfied the match. We can also see some high-level statistics as far as our matching results. Let's jump back to the grid. We can see the various rules that were used based on the color of the square. What's different in a matching project is, again, DQS gives the data steward or the data expert the ability to override DQS. So we have the ability, before we export data, is to reject a record. So we could actually mark this record as rejected, and it will actually, when we do the export, will be removed from the cluster. So once we've reviewed our matches, again, you have the same ability to view matched versus unmatched. You can click Next, and your export types are, again, very similar, CSV, Excel, and SQL. You have 2 different exports. The matching result is exactly similar to what we looked at before. It gives you the results of the matching. The survivorship will actually choose a surviving record. So there's a couple different ways. The pivot record is basically DQS randomly picks one of the records from the cluster. Most complete and longest, it uses algorithms to determine which record is the most complete or longest, and then obviously just longest. Now, if there's any tie, again, DQS goes back to just randomly picking one of the records that were tied. So let's just export these real quick. So I can show you what they look like. Let's see if it exported or if it just gave me an error. It didn't export. All right, so the export is it's not working. See if it'll let me go to a CSV file. All right. So apparently I'm missing a component that I need to do the Excel export. So export to CSV, which will work. So the first is the obviously match, and you see what you get. You get your cluster information. So in the case, this is our first cluster. If we look at that, we can see that the teams that were clustered together, all my Buccaneer teams, as well as a cluster for the race. And you can see that none of the other records it found matches for, so they were just included by default. Now, if we look at the survivorship, and I'm going to keep this open so we can flip back over there, what we see is just a single list of records. So in this case, if we go down and find our Tampa Bay Buccaneers, this was the record that was selected as the surviving record for the cluster. And we could do the same for the Tampa Bay Rays if it was sorted where I could find it. Here. So if we switch back over here, we'll notice that this actually corresponds with our pivot records here and here. So that's the difference between the two exports. One gives you all the information as far as clusters and what records participate in them, and the second is actually just the deduplicated set of data. That wraps up the demo portion. There's a few other things to point out in the next minute or so. There's a great white paper which I referenced earlier by Microsoft that's performance. There's a lot of important things to consider if this is something that you're going to pursue. The maturity of your knowledge base is really the biggest predictor of the performance you'll get. So you really do have to take time to go through the knowledge discovery process multiple times. Actually, the one thing I didn't point out is you have the ability to reincorporate data as you do a data quality project back into your knowledge base. And I've got a minute left, so I will point that out, because that's an important part of, as your data experts are running through knowledge discovery, doing cleansing activities, they're obviously identifying more distinct or unique values, more incorrect values. You can actually pull those in, and I probably don't have an example to pull in. On the domain values, you have a import values option, and if there are values available, you can actually import project values, and those will actually get pulled into your knowledge base so that your data stewards or business users aren't constantly having to redo the same corrections over and over. That is all I have. I will open it up for questions at this point.
Okay, Chris, do you want me to read some questions to you?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. Can we export the data into Oracle?
Export from the data quality, not directly. You would, the only way to export data out of the DQS solution is through the methods I pointed out, whether it's a CSV file or to a SQL Server. Now, if you have a savvy DBA, and I'm not a DBA and I don't pretend to be one, you obviously could get into doing some stuff with linked servers potentially, but that's kind of, you would have to play around with that.
Okay. One of the questions says that it looks like that all of the work is being done manually. What if you have millions of data that you need to go through? How would you proceed the same way?
Right. So in the white paper that I referenced, Microsoft pointed out how to handle this, how to handle a situation where you get into large amounts of data. The knowledge base, when you're building it out, you're trying to get the most accurate, the most complete list of distinct values. So I think they pointed out that like U.S. names, there were like maybe it was 500,000 or 800,000 names. So your options are to divide it up into manageable chunks and assign those chunks out and have people work on a chunk of data. The other option is to actually use some sort of reference data. If you already have that reference data in your organization, you can certainly bypass somebody having to go check boxes and just pull it all in one big knowledge discovery process.
Okay. Jean would like to know, this is when you were using the autocorrect and it was the MLBB.
Yep.
And she wanted to know that if you autocorrect it one time, does it learn and would it autocorrect it again for itself?
Right. Actually, let me. That goes back into the importing project values back into the knowledge base. So by default, when your business users and data experts are using the tool, no data is added back to your knowledge base. And that's done by design because they want whoever the subject matter expert is for the knowledge base to have to take an action to include that knowledge base so that you don't get wrong values in your knowledge base. So once you've used that process and you've had people doing cleansing activities, that data steward or subject matter expert can go into the knowledge base, the domain management, and actually import project values so that those corrections don't have to occur on a ongoing basis.
Okay, great. Does Andrew would like to know, does this handle international characters?
Yes, it does. And they're actually, let me jump out of here. And by default, when you install DQS, you get a knowledge base that's included. And that is the, I don't have it here. It's the DQS data. So you can actually look at that to see kind of what's possible. Let's open it up for domain. You'll see that there's a variety of character types and stuff like that that are included. You can go into the next question. I'll just bring that up.
Okay, sure. Let's see. What are the limitations to using SSIS for data services?
The limitations, there's not any really. I guess it's more expectations than limitations. Obviously, you have to understand how the component works and that the DQS activities aren't occurring within the data flow pipeline. You're actually batching the data up and sending it off to DQS. If you are using like a cloud data service, then that batch is going from the DQS service to the cloud. So you have to understand how the process works so that your expectations are somewhat realistic in the performance you're going to get out of it. There are some things you can do that I discussed as far as splitting the data flow so that you can take advantage of multiple processors. But they put out some Microsoft put out some numbers on what kind of performance you can expect on various hardware with various loads based on your knowledge base.
Okay. Just want to put out a reminder to the audience that our sessions are recorded and will be available for you to re-review at the end of the week. So if you want to go back and look through this again and just make sure that everything what you thought was there is there. You can review this again near the end of the week. Chris, looks like we're running out of time, and I'm not sure what you have on your schedule. We do still have some questions in the box, and I can actually send those out to you. And if your question wasn't answered, I can get Chris to send you an email and answer those questions for you. That's up to you, Chris. That'd be good? Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Great session.
Real quick, I'll point people to my blog because the demo I did is I walk through step by step doing that in my blog. So if it's something you're interested in, please check that out.
Chris, can you put that slide? Oh, got it. Perfect. Again, that's Chris Price at pragmaticworks.com. If you would like to follow him on Twitter at BlueWaterSQL, and you can visit his blog at bidn.com, cprice1979. You can always visit pragmaticworks.com. That's where our webinars can be found, and you can select the one that you'd like to review again and log in. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you guys on Thursday. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too.